everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap up, so talking about all the books that I read during the month of April. First of all, we'll start off with the reading stats. This month I had a pretty good reading month, especially compared to March where I only read one book. So my reading stats for April, I read 5 books, I read 896 pages, listened to 14 hours of audiobook, my average rating was 4.1 and I read 2 own voices books. So the first book I finished in April was Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan. I actually started it in March but I finally finished it in April. First of all, I just need a moment to appreciate this edition. This is the Waterstones exclusive edition, so it's got sprayed edges. As you can see, it's got like a 2-tone sprayed edge and it like carries on from the cover of the book, so it's half like this orangey yellow and half red. This book follows Ava. She's an Irish woman in her 20s who has moved to Hong Kong and teaches English to rich children in one of those the TEFL program, which is the Teaching English as a Foreign Language program, just in case you never heard of it. And she gets into a fling with this very rich banker called Julian, but when his job takes him to London for several months, she then meets a lady called Edith and is instantly attracted to her, and they end up having a bit of a fling as well, because the relationship between Ava and Julian was a bit complicated, they weren't particularly official or anything. And so then Ava kind of faces a fork in the road. Should she return to the easy compatibility of her life with Julian or take a leap into the unknown with Edith? This book has received very mixed reviews. The average rating on Goodreads is 3.38 stars, I believe, and I can definitely understand why. Our narrator Ava is very unlikable, she's blunt and could be described as cold as well. However, that wasn't something I particularly minded actually. I ended up giving this book 3.75 stars, which is obviously still a pretty good rating. It was very nearly a 4 for me, to be honest. There isn't really a plot, it's very much a slice of life type of book, and I suppose it could be seen as quite monotonous as well. Seeing as this is Nisha Dolan's debut, I would definitely like to see what she puts out next. This is described as for fans of Sally Rooney as well, which I can definitely understand the comparison. So if you're a fan of either or both of Sally Rooney's books, I would definitely recommend this book. Next, I finished the audiobook of Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is another book that I started in March but only finished this month. This is a young adult mystery / thriller which follows 17-year-old Enchanted Jones, who has aspirations of becoming a singer and recording artist. And right at the beginning of the book, she enters into this singing talent competition, and there she meets a man called Corey Fields, who's this super famous singer. He's really successful, but then Enchanted wakes up with blood on her hands and Corey Fields has been found dead and she has no memory of the previous night. That is how our book starts. We already know how this is going to end really, but it's all about how it ends up getting there. And basically what happens is that Corey ends up taking on Enchanted as a bit of a mentor to work on her singing and career, and she thinks that, oh my gosh, I've hit the jackpot. A successful artist thinks that I'm talented and that I'm beautiful, but then Corey's charm ends up becoming super controlling and abusive and manipulative. So there are big trigger warnings for this book. The trigger warnings are listed at the beginning of the book, so it includes things like manipulation, abusive relationships, sexual assault. So some very serious and hard topics are covered in this book that it might be questionable as to why it's categorised as YA. However, the events of this book are things that have most likely happened to teenage girls in the past. Tiffany D. Jackson has said that the story is partly inspired by R. Kelly and his victims, although she's made clear that it's not actually about him. And it's important for teenagers to learn and recognise when a relationship becomes toxic and abusive, especially if you are of a really young age and you're getting into a relationship with a man who is much older than you. In the example of Grown, as I said, Enchanted is 17 and Corey is 28 years old, and it might seem exciting as a young girl to be in a relationship with an older man, but it can sometimes lead to bad situations throughout no fault of the girls. And this book was very stressful to listen to, especially even just over over talking to each other, especially because you like know what it's inspired by and you know how it ends up, because the opening scene is literally Enchanted waking up with the blood on her hands, and there's just lots of very scary and suspenseful situations. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I very nearly gave it 4.5 because the very last chapter had me absolutely gagged.
Gagatron
Because it was such like a good twist, and it left you questioning what had just happened and who was telling the truth and everything like that. I really recommend Grown if the subject matter isn't triggering for you, because it is quite intense and serious. And then I read some poetry. I read The Mermaid's Voice Returns in this one by Amanda Lovelace. This is the 3rd book in the Women Are Some Kind of Magic series. So now reading this book, I've finally completed that little trilogy. And I know some people say that Amanda Lovelace's poetry isn't actually poetry, but I am of the opinion that I think poetry can be whatever you want it to be, really. And you know, this collection wasn't enjoyable. It was as enjoyable and on par with her previous books that I've read, and there were definitely some poems that I could connect to and relate to, or just poems in particular that I liked I thought were particularly impactful. For example, one of the poems that I dogged and really liked was "Becoming your own saviour sometimes means knowing when you need to ask for help. Therapy session number 1." That was one that I in particular could relate to with I felt in the past, and I liked how she included work by other poets as well, and how she asked them to contribute to the book and write their own poems based on the themes. Now I read what ended up being my favourite book of the month, and that is Kate in Waiting by Becky Albertalli. This is about Kate and her best friend Anderson, and they've been best friends for years and years, and they've always had common crushes, so they've always fancied the same guy. But when a guy they liked at theatre camp moves to the town and turns up at the school, things become a bit tricky, especially when real feelings for this guy are involved. This is your typical YA high school contemporary romance. It's not super romance heavy, it's a lot of pining. It's not something like The Sun Is Also a Star, for example, but it's actually the most I've enjoyed reading a book. I've had the most positive feelings towards a book in quite a while. I genuinely enjoyed my experience reading it. The characters are really good. They were likeable, but they had their flaws on show as well. I really liked the relationships, both romantic and platonic. The representation too. I'm a big fan of casual representation that isn't necessarily being made into a big deal. So Kate is Jewish, Anderson is gay and black, one of her friends, Raina, is trans. There's also a side character called Emma who's in a wheelchair, and I'm pretty sure their theatre teacher has a wife as well. I think that was mentioned. If you're a theatre kid, I definitely recommend this book. Our main characters are big theatre nerds, and during the book they're putting on their autumn school musical. That's one of the elements of the book that I found relatable. I love theatre and musicals, and I've been in a few musicals during high school and just shows in general. All the feelings that Kate had about how special it feels to be in a musical, the rehearsal process, the dress rehearsals, the tech runs, all the stuff in the dressing rooms, were all very relatable. This is actually the first solo Becky Albertalli book that has been published in quite a few years, and the first one that was outside of the Love, Simon, Creekwood High School universe, and it was really fantastic. I ended up giving it 4.5/4.75 stars. And then the last book I finished in April, as in I literally finished it last night on the 30th of April, was Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wubgashig Rice. I heard about this book from Books and Lala. This was one of her favourite books from a couple of years ago. I read this as well to fulfil the buzzword-a-thon prompt for April, which was to read books with space-themed words in the title. This is a post-apocalyptic dystopian thriller. We're following Evan Whitesky, who's part of a small northern Anishinaabe community. Winter is approaching and everybody's preparing for it, but there's a power cut, they have no electricity or heating, they are waiting upon help from people in the south, but it seems like nobody's coming to help them. The council leaders are struggling to keep the community from descending into chaos, and then an unexpected visitor arrives, joins the community and manipulates the members of the community, and he himself takes control of the reserve. This book starts off very slowly and things really do escalate. Some of the characters have strange realistic dreams that almost seem like premonitions of what could happen. I think the scariest thing about this book as well is that this could actually happen, and they probably have happened too in the past, especially with white people entering these communities and trying to take control and lead of the land and of Indigenous communities. I haven't really read any books before with Indigenous representation, but I definitely want to read more, particularly some non-fiction too, as I definitely have a gap in my knowledge when it comes to Native American, Indigenous and First Nations communities and people. And if you have any recommendations for those type of books, please comment down below and let me know. And just in case I forgot to give a rating, I gave this book 4 stars. So there we have it, the 5 books I read in April, 3 physical books and then 2 audio books. If you've read any of these books, let me know in the comments down below and what you thought of them. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos. I hope you have a great day and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!